Hey, friends, it's Mark from the Where to Gays Retire podcast. I want to tell you that I built something close to my heart, LGBTQseniors.com. It's a free, welcoming online community for LGBTQ seniors. We've got forums, private messaging, real conversations, and monthly Zoom meetups where members from around the world connect, laugh, and feel a little less alone. No algorithms, no noise, just real people, real talk, and real community, all completely free. If you've ever thought, I wish there were a space like this, well, now there is. And if you enjoy what I bring to the table, I hope you'll find it in your heart to buy me a coffee or even a few to help keep this community going strong. So please visit lgbtqseniors.com today because connection matters and pride doesn't retire. Thank you.
Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, where we help you in the LGBTQ plus community find a safe and affordable retirement place. Join Mark Goldstein as he interviews others who live in gay-friendly places around the globe. Learn about the climate, cost of living, healthcare, crime and safety, and more. Now, here's your host, Mark Goldstein.
And today we have a different topic. The topic is Americans moving to Spain. We have our guest, Christopher Hughey, and I'll tell you a little bit about Christopher's background. Christopher was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee in the United States. Since then, he has lived, worked, and studied in 6 countries, more than once in 3 of those countries in 7 American states. With an undergraduate degree in languages and international studies, Christopher is uniquely qualified to assist people seeking to undertake a move to Spain. Based in Sevilla in southwestern Spain, Christopher, a serial entrepreneur, started Americans moving to Spain in the early 2020s to streamline and simplify a relocation to Spain. And Christopher also has a Facebook group, Americans Moving to Spain. He's the admin there. And we got to know each other from the Facebook group. So welcome, Christopher. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. Yes, we're very pleased that Facebook group has grown to 12,000 members. We just passed another milestone last week. So we're very happy with all the thousands of people coming to, look into, everybody from the casual sort of, it sounds like an idea I might be interested in, all the way to the, where do I sign? Let's get this done and let's get moving. With the events in the news, and we're recording this, of course, in the middle of September 2025, with everything in the news, our inbox is getting, let's just say we're keeping busy. Let's just put it that way.
It's overflowing. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And it's a great time to let our audience know what exactly it takes and how to go about moving to Spain from the U.S.
Right.
So let's open up. Who moves to Spain from the U.S. most successfully? And why Spain over other EU options that we have?
Well, let's break that out into a couple of things. So let's talk about the definition of success. There's 2 aspects of that as far as I'm concerned. There's one, who's a good candidate? In other words, who are the people who are going to actually meet the qualifications to move? Who's going to have a successful visa application? And I understand, most of the people listening to this are probably thinking more in terms of retirement to Spain. And that is a very straightforward process as far as Spain is concerned. It's a pretty transparent process for getting what's called the non-lucrative visa. The income requirement is quite low. For a single person, it's only 28,800 euros a year. That's slightly revised upwards based on trailing inflation and wages every January. They put that up a little bit, but by single digits. And then you add a percentage for each individual co-applicant or dependent. So it's a pretty low bar. So in terms of what it takes to be successful, assuming you have the money, again, it's not much, and a clean criminal background check, and even that, there's a little bit of wiggle room on that. It's pretty easy to have a successful non-lucrative visa application to move to Spain. But that's just one aspect. One is, can you move to Spain? The other aspect is, what makes a successful move to Spain? In other words, should you? Or are you going to be happy? Right. One thing is to get the visa. We do that for you. That honestly, we have 100% approval rate. It's not rocket science, okay? It's just a lot of paperwork, and that's what we're here for. But now, whether or not it's going to be a good move for you, that's another question. And I think that this is something that people need to take very seriously. It's something I write about on our Facebook page and in other media quite a bit. And I think that people need to, the biggest thing is what I was writing about recently is you need to make sure you understand your why. And your why can't just be about moving away from something.
Away.
And this is something that is very, very important for people to consider. Look, I think anybody who's read even one of my social media accounts knows how I feel about Donald Trump and the current administration of the United States and what's going on in the U.S. It's no secret. But one thing I tell people is, look, you can't just be running away from that. Okay. If your why is I have to get out and that's your only why, I don't think you will be happy in Spain. And I don't think you'll be happy anywhere else. You know, I think you need to have something that's pulling you, not just something that's pushing you. And this is why I think it's very important that people do scouting trips to Spain. And let's not confuse scouting trips with vacation. They are not the same thing. This is very important too. And this is one of the things that makes people more successful or less successful at moving here. Scouting trip means you want to go to Spain to see what it's like to live there. You're not going to be living in museums and old castles and old cool medieval fortresses, okay? Those things are fun to visit. I love them. I'm a big history nerd myself. I love going to places like that. But when you're on a scouting trip, you're trying to get a feel for what it's like to live in that country. So when you come, if you want to be successful at relocating to Spain, my first piece of advice is come here. And don't just come here on vacation. Don't just hang out at the Prado in Madrid, you know, and go along the Rambla in Barcelona. You need to come here and get yourself ensconced in a residential neighborhood for at least a few days, ideally longer, and focus more on the day-to-day. What's it going to be like to live there? Never mind the museums and the fortresses and the castles and then this and then that. Go to the pharmacy. Go to the grocery store. Do you like the grocery stores? Are you going to be able to get the food you like there? You know, walk the neighborhoods. Do you like the people? Do you like the vibe of it? One of the biggest mistakes people make when they do their quote unquote scouting trips. For example, I live here, as you noted in the intro. I live in Seville, Spain, which is a very ancient, beautiful, beautiful city. It used to be a Roman town before that. It's been settled for thousands of years. So much to see here. But if you're thinking about living here, don't stay in the Casco Antiguo. Don't stay in the old town. Stay in one of the neighborhoods outside of it. Sure, go see the Plaza de España, Maria Luisa, the Alcázar. Great, go spend a little time there, but walk the neighborhoods. You know, go inside the grocery stores, go inside the fruterias, you know, the fruit shops, the butcher's shops. Get a sense for what it's really like to live there. So if you want to be successful at living in another country, try to get to know it a little bit at first and make sure that you have a reason that's pulling you there, not just pushing you out of your home country.
Well, it sounds like my trip that's coming up. So
yes, we discussed that. I think you've got the right idea. It seems like you've kind of very good very much in the vein of a successful scouting trip. That's right.
Going to 3 major cities that I'm interested in: Valencia, Alicante, and Malaga. Staying at Airbnbs in the middle of town, where I could walk to a cafe, where I could walk to a fruteria, to the market, and live there for a period of time. And so I want to experience what life is like and whether I'm good for that type of life.
Exactly.
You know, I hate to drive in the United States, a vehicle. So I'm all for walkable community with high-speed rail. I'm like, fine. I grew up in New York City, and we walked everywhere. We had the subway and everything else. So I'm really looking forward to experience what it's like.
Well, I always say one of the happiest days, the most recent, I've lived in Spain twice now. The most recent time I moved prior to departing the U.S., one of my happiest days was the day I sold my car, knowing that it would not be replaced. I hate driving. For me, cars are just a means to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
I've never gotten the allure of automobiles. I don't find them sexy. I just find driving kind of a task, and it's kind of annoying. So the day I sold that car when I was, the last place I lived in the U.S. most recently was in North Carolina. The day I sold that car, I felt it was like a large burden being lifted off my shoulders. I don't own one here in Seville. You don't need one. Certain people would in certain circumstances, of course, as in any city, right? But if you live here, in town, honestly, you don't need a car. And that's true of many Spanish cities. Many Spanish cities are very, very walkable, and public transportation is really excellent in Spain. In fact, I hate to brag. I'm just kidding. I don't hate it at all. We have the fastest average train speed between cities. Like, we have the fastest train network in all of Europe. So there's an excellent infrastructure. And within cities, you've got the local trains that go out to the suburbs, the cercanías. You've got, of course, in many cities, you've got metros. Here in Spain, we have both a metro and a tram. The bus system is excellent. I take the bus to go to certain parts of town. But honestly, I usually don't use any of those. Seville is one of the most walkable cities in Europe. So
that's great.
It's great.
So what are the few misconceptions that Americans have about moving to Spain?
Well, it depends on what their personal experience is and how much time they've spent here versus how much they're getting from sort of stereotypes and whatnot, right? But some of the biggest misconceptions, there's so many, it's hard to choose. Let's start with a simple one: climate. Americans think of Spain and they think of the sun. In fact, Spain being good at marketing, and they've actually used that emblem of the sun and different symbols over the years. This is the place where many Europeans come to the beach, right? But Spain has actually got an incredibly diverse climate and landscape geography. There's almost nothing you can't find in Spain from a climate and geography point of view, right? So we do have a lot of sun, but there's also skiing in the Sierra Nevada and the Pyrenees. You've got parts of Spain that have full 4-season climates. Then you've got places down here where I live in Seville, which is like basically 2 seasons, really hot and just kind of warm, So this idea that Spain is this uniformly sunny climate is completely wrong. Up in the Northwest, it's like living in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. Rainy winters, very verdant in the spring. So pretty much anything you want, you can have here. But so that's kind of on the climate thing. That's a big misconception about Spain. Another big misconception, I think, that a lot of Americans particularly labor under is that Spain is, uniformly cheap, and that this is going to be a place where you're going to live like a king. Spain is not whatever, some random, you're not moving to like, Paraguay or Costa Rica or wherever. Right. Spain is certainly less expensive within the context of Western Europe. Absolutely. Will you have a lower cost of living than in, say, the Netherlands or Germany, or even for that matter, even France? Absolutely. Definitely a lower cost of living. But I wouldn't describe Spain as quote unquote cheap, And in fact, I personally think, and I hope the government isn't listening to this because I wouldn't want them to take my advice, but I even think that the income requirement for the non-lucrative visa is very low. It's only about 29,000 euros a year, as I said. And there aren't a lot of places in Spain where a single person with 29,000 euros a year, roughly, would live what I would call very comfortably. There are places, certainly within the interior, but once you get along the more expensive places around the coast or in the capital in Madrid, that would be a pretty tight budget. So, is it less expensive than most places in the United States? Yes. But would I call the lifestyle here cheap? No, I would not.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the visas that are available to U.S. citizens. The NLV, non-lucrative visa, is one of the most probably prevalent, especially in our market, to whom we're talking to. Can you discuss that and briefly maybe just touch upon a digital nomad? And
sure. I'll just start with the ones that are probably not as great, just so that people are aware that they're out there in case they want to inquire. Yeah. But given the target audience for this podcast, I think the NLV, it does make the most sense to focus on. So let's knock out the other ones just real quick, just mention them. There's the digital nomad visa, which allows you to live and work in Spain, but only if your income is coming from a foreign country because you're working remotely for a foreign company. No more than 20% of your income can come from Spanish sources, and it doesn't give you an authorization to work for just any Spanish company. You have to be a digital nomad. Interesting little side note, though, if you have a spouse, your spouse is actually given a full work authorization, oddly enough. So just to mention that one quickly, that's the main alternative. There are some lesser known ones. There's an entrepreneur visa, but that's used less and less these days since the introduction of the DNV. It's for starting an innovative business. There's, of course, student visas. But the limitation there is it doesn't actually give you residency rights. It's only good for as long as you're enrolled in a program, in a study program. So, and then there's some lesser known scenarios. But the main one that people listening to this podcast are going to be interested in is the non-lucrative visa. That's the formal name for it. Sometimes it's casually referred to as the retirement visa. So the idea, as the name suggests, is as non-lucrative, as in you are not allowed to work. This does not give you a work authorization. And not only does it not give you a work authorization to seek employment in Spain, but you're also in principle not allowed to do any gainful employment with source from any country. So now I hear of plenty of stories of people violating that and people getting the non-lucrative visa and coming over and doing work for some remote U.S. company. They need to be aware, though, that is not allowed by the rules of the non-lucrative visa. So, and if that were to be discovered, they could, in principle, revoke your visa. So make sure you've got the right visa type. And the non-lucrative visa, as we talked about, 28.8K is the current one. That'll be revised upwards in January for a single person. Tack on another 25% of that for each dependent or spouse. So it's a pretty low bar, really, when you think about it, So at current exchange rates, we're only talking about about $43,000 at current exchange rates for a couple, for a married couple. Okay.
That's pretty good.
And it's pretty low. And that can be passive income, savings, or a combination of the two. So what do we mean by passive income? The most obvious example is a pension, be it that Social Security, a private pension, IRA, 401k, whatever. You just need to be aware that if you're going to be leveraging things like retirement accounts, the money must be available to you. So for example, if it's an age-restricted account, says, hey, you can't touch this till you're 59 and a half, and you're applying at age 55, that money can't count towards that 43-ish thousand for that couple, right? So you can't use time-restricted accounts. It needs to be money available to you. So again, it can either be passive income, savings, or a combination. So a classic example would be a client comes to us and says, look, I've got Social Security. That's around, let's call it $3,000 a month. Let's call it $3,000 a month. But I've also got $200,000 in savings. So they meet that requirement. Even though Social Security income isn't enough to meet that $43,000 they need to hit as a couple, they're supplementing it with savings. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a combination. Makes sense? So in principle, you could have zero passive income, but have enough cash savings to meet the requirement.
Okay. So for instance, if I'm collecting Social Security, my husband's collecting Social Security, and he has also a pension, plus we have retirement account savings. That, and of course, we're over 65.
Right. There are no age restrictions.
Past that as well. Exactly. No age restrictions. We can like make a phone call or go online and just, get the funds.
Right.
So that would be considered
that you would be for you. You would easily meet the income requirements, no problem whatsoever. In fact, we would not report all of those because look, Spain isn't interested. Spain doesn't use, and this is something that's worth pointing out because I said earlier, it's a pretty straightforward visa. Some countries use what amounts to a point system. So they have a certain quota. They say, look, we're going to let in X number of thousands of people under this visa program this year. So every applicant is kind of given a score. So the more money you have, higher score. Or if it's a different kind of visa, maybe they're looking at how much education, or if you have skills the country considers to be important to the country, what have you. Or if you have children and they're looking to grow their population, they might assign you points. Spain does not work like that. With the non-lucrative visa, it's a very binary, straightforward, tick-the-box approach. You don't get extra credit for having more money. You either meet the income requirement or you don't. And because of that, there are no points involved. So because of that, we don't want to overcomplicate your application. So we're not going to tell Spain about every penny you have under every mattress, every account you have. We're going to give them the necessary documentation to prove that you meet that income requirement. And that's it. That's all they need to know. Because generally speaking, and this is true dealing with any bureaucracy anywhere in the world, America, Spain, Uganda, it doesn't matter. When dealing with bureaucracies, don't ever give more information than is necessary because every point of information you give them is opening the box to just more inquiries, more questions. Oh, we're looking at this. Well, why don't you give us more documentation around this? Don't invite questions. You give them what they need to know to say yes to you, and that's it. So, for example, if I could just use your example, we would not submit documentation around all the types of accounts you just mentioned. It wouldn't help your application. Right. So we would get up to that mark we need to get up to, and then we would submit documentation to prove you meet that criterion, and then that's it. That box is ticked, and we move on. Another important box is criminal background. you do have to get an FBI background check for all adults on the application. The primary applicant, any dependents, anybody 18 or older on the application must have an FBI criminal background check if you've been living in the States. Most clients we come across have a completely clean record, no problems. We've gotten people approved who have minor things. Spain doesn't care about, youthful indiscretions. Spain's really looking for recent. If you've got something on your record in the last 5 years, that's going to be problematic. If you have something minor on your record and it's longer ago, Spain's probably not going to care. I've had clients, one client who had a minor drug charge as a youth. He was like 20 years old. This was 25 years ago. And he was very nervous about it. Oh, we're going to get rejected. No, you're not. And he was not. He was not rejected. Spain doesn't care that you smoked a joint in 1995. Okay. Right.
Right.
So if you have some minor stuff on your FBI background check, don't sweat it. It's probably solvable. Okay. It's probably not a deal breaker. So you got the income requirement, the FBI background check, and there's some other requirements around the two big ones that come to mind. The medical certificate from your doctor. But honestly, that's even not a big deal because it doesn't involve a physical exam. It's just generally, does your doctor feel that you are well enough to move to another country? It's not a very strict requirement. The language is pretty loose. It's not a big
deal. Not like bringing tuberculosis with you.
Exactly right. Not being like West Nile bleeding brain syndrome. They want to make sure the really horrible communicable diseases are not something you've got. I had one doctor who looked at that form and just laughed when he read the WHO thing. Because he said, look, if you had any of those diseases, you'd be dying in front of my eyes. So I'm not really worried about it. Right? So that one's a bit of a joke. But the more serious one, though, is the need for the non-lucrative visa. Remember, you will not, at least in most parts of Spain, I'll come back to that in a moment. In most parts of Spain, you will not be allowed to have access to the public healthcare system because you're not paying into it. You're a retiree. You've never paid into it before. Now you're retiring to Spain. You won't be paying into it when you get here. So there's this requirement until you become a permanent resident that you must have your own private healthcare insurance. And for retirees, that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes because, look, we all get to a certain age. I'm 54 myself and things are already starting to break down a little bit. Older we get, the more they just wait for it, right?
Wait until you're my
Spoiler
age.
alert. So, everybody's got their little things. The thing is, obviously, the public system cannot discriminate against pre-existing conditions, of course, obviously. But private can. They absolutely can. And they do.
Now,
and
how do you work? How do you work that?
Sometimes there's a little bit of finesse involved. I mean, look, chances are, at least for the first few years, if you're on a private health insurance, if you have a major pre-existing condition, they will probably exclude it. But they don't typically put that exclusionary language in the summary page that is submitted through to Spain. So Spain knows you're covered. Spain doesn't necessarily know, though, if you've had something excluded as a pre-existing condition for a limited amount of time. So that's one route. And in other cases, if they don't exclude it, they may charge you significantly more money. Private insurance in Spain is much less expensive than in the U.S. For like a family of four, no pre-existing conditions, a typical premium would be like maybe 225 euros a month, not each, for the entire family. And that's for a good policy. That's not bare bones coverage. That's like no copays, no deductibles, no waiting time. That's an ironclad good policy.
And vision, dental.
Well, for vision insurance is not as common in Spain, I would say, as in the States. Dental, you can always add on if you want, but it's not required for the visa. That's up to you. Personally, I'll just tell you, because dental work is not typically covered by the health system, the public system, I've never, frankly, bothered with private dental insurance myself because I've always found it so reasonably priced that it's better to pay out of pocket anyway. So, but yes, the important thing is you get this private healthcare insurance policy by whatever means you need to. And what I often advise people to do is I say, look, instead of risking getting rejected for coverage or having them jack up your rate, check into how much it would cost you to manage this condition out of pocket. I'll give you a perfect example. A client recently, she has hypothyroidism. Okay. That would certainly not get her rejected for an insurance policy, but she was concerned that they might jack up her rates. And I said, look, I know for a fact, because someone close to me has that exact same condition. It's very common, right? I can tell you out of experience that a typical pharmacy for a month supply of levothyroxine or Synthroid for your thyroid is about 7 euros. Okay. So, and I always tell people, check into it. You would be shocked at how much cheaper medications are here in Spain. So before you kind of use that American mentality of, oh, there's no way I could ever afford this on my own. Don't assume that's true in Spain. So check it out. And if you're on a medication, go to a Spanish pharmacy, take your meds, and ask them, how much would this cost if I had to pay for this out of pocket? You might be shocked at how inexpensive it is. And if it's very reasonably priced, so therefore you don't need medical insurance for it, then just leave it off and just accept that you're going to be paying for that out of pocket, right? You'd be surprised how affordable it is.
So what happens if you leave it off and then you have to get medical attention for that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, so the private insurance company won't be responsible for paying for it if you left it off, or if they determine, even if it's something that comes, if they determine it's a pre-existing condition, they could exclude it from coverage. Absolutely. If you're talking about a health crisis, I mean, look, Spain, like most civilized countries in the world, views healthcare as an inherent right. It doesn't.
Right.
If you let's say that you have hypertension. Let's just take an example. Okay, I'm just going to make up an example. Let's say you have hypertension. Let's say you left that off because you were afraid you might get rejected. You're like, you know what? I'll pay for my hypertension meds out of my pocket. And let's say, knock on wood, God's forbid, you have a heart incident, a cardiac incident, heart attack, whatever. Call the ambulance. The ambulance comes. They take you to the hospital, the public hospital. This is Spain. This isn't the United States. Nobody's going to be saying, where's your insurance card while you're clutching your chest. Okay. Nobody's going to be saying, where's your credit card? Do we need a credit card to guarantee payment? I need somebody to sign saying they'll take on responsibility for your debt if you don't. It doesn't work that way. Spain, what's going to happen if you had a cardiac incident is you will be taken by an ambulance to the closest hospital. They will treat you, and they will make sure that you get the care that you need to get, whether you're on the public system or not. Now, in principle, what the law says is that if you are in that circumstance under the non-lucrative visa and you're required to have private insurance and something like that happens, the law says that technically the public hospital should then send you a bill, right? Let me tell you that in practice, it often doesn't happen. Why? Number one, people who work in the public health system are not business. Money just doesn't, like a lot of these places in hospitals, right. There's no cash register. Like even if you whipped out a credit card, they'd be like, what do you want me to do with that?
What's that?
Like, what do you, are you going out for dinner afterwards? Like, we don't have a card machine here. What are you doing? So in theory, they should send you a bill, but I can tell you a real world example. This happened to, this wasn't a client. This was actually a friend of mine who came here a couple of years ago. She has ties to Seville, where I live. And she's actually a Swiss citizen, and Switzerland actually has a reciprocity agreement, but you have to register when you move here and sign up to get it recognized. And she just never bothered. I guess it fell off her radar. And her 17-year-old son had a bad accident while playing soccer, like fractured his leg, a serious fracture. It required an ambulance ride, and it wasn't just putting in a cast. There were complications. There was a minor surgical thing involved. He had to stay 3 nights in the hospital. It was a really bad fracture. And they did end up sending her a bill. They said, well, you're not registered on the public system, and so we do have to send you a bill for this. And eventually they did. She got a bill 6 months later, finally. It came out of the blue. You know how much that bill was? Now, before I tell you the answer, I want you to think about what I just described in the United States. An ambulance ride to the hospital.
That's at least $1,000.
Not a simple fracture, not a put a cast on it and get you out the door. 3 nights in the hospital. And some sort of, I don't recall what it was, but some sort of surgical intervention in the process of correcting this, of setting this fracture. They sent her a bill for 750 euros. She said she's never paid a bill with such joy in her life. She was like, I paid that bill so fast. I was delighted to pay it. I want you to think about how much that would have been in the United States. I would conservatively estimate, ambulance, 3 nights, complex fracture, surgical intervention, 50,000 easily, right?
Oh,
easily.
yeah.
750 euros. So, So let's say you do have to resort to the public system. Let's say they do send you that bill. It could be, I'm sure for some types of things, it could be more, but let's just put it this way. It's hard to explain to Spaniards what the term medical bankruptcy means. Whereas in the United States, right. Hundreds of thousands of people file for bankruptcy due to medical issues every single year.
That's
right.
Yeah. That's why we have bigger homeless problem than we do.
Right.
So, but after a year of residency, you're allowed to join the public system, the Convenio
Especial. It's a little complicated, and every comunidad. So let me pause and explain something. Spain has a decentralized healthcare system. So it's a nationally funded system. in great part. However, each comunidad, for the most part, runs its own health system. For example, I live in Sevilla. We actually, this is the capital of the Comunidad of Andalusia, right? That big southern chunk of Spain. It's broken down into 8 provinces. It runs its own healthcare system and has therefore its own rules. Catalonia has a different healthcare system and has its own set of rules. Some comunidades actually have true universal healthcare system where they will, if you are a registered legal resident of their comunidad, they will let you have access to the public system, whether you're paying into it or not. Where I live does not have that. You're supposed to be a paying contributor. Now, what you just pointed out, after 1 year, you can solicit access to the system through what's called the Convenio Especial. But I wouldn't guarantee that will work in every comunidad in every circumstance. So I would just caution people not to necessarily take that as an ironclad, a possibility.
Right. Check out where you live.
The circumstance. Exactly. So it's not necessarily, but the idea is, and it will work in most cases, the idea is you're essentially buying your way into the public system. You get on, you subscribe, you're accepted, and you pay a monthly mensualidad, like a monthly payment. It's not much. I don't know the exact figure, but I want to say it's roughly normally around 60, 70 euros a person, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, it goes up if you're 65. Yes, exactly. It goes up to 157 euros.
Exactly. It's scaled up based on age and things like that. So, but still, when you do the math compared to the United States, can you imagine buying into a healthcare system for even triple that amount, even like $500 a month? Can you imagine? That would be a bargain at 10 times 10 times.
So tell us the process. The process is first, what do you do first if you're interested in getting a visa? You fill out forms first and then bring those forms to the consulate, send it to the consulate?
I will pause just for a moment to say that we're assuming that you figured out your why first and that you're making the right move. And I think it's important to talk to people like me or other experts and visit Spain. So I want people, before we get into the tick the boxes phase, people need to be sure that it's right for them. So let's assume they've done that. Let's assume that we're ready to move forward. Where you for the non-lucrative visa, unlike some other visa types, including the digital nomad visa, you must apply through your assigned consulate. And what do we mean by assigned consulate? It's all about geography. Spain has 9 consulates in the United States, 1 on the island of Puerto Rico and 8 on the mainland. And where you live determines which consulate you're assigned to. Unfortunately, you don't get to pick and choose. If you could, these days I'd be sending everybody to Chicago. But sadly, you don't.
Yeah, I'm blessed with LA.
Yeah. You know what? I tell you, LA used to be one of my least favorite. I tell you what, they have gotten, I actually we've had a much easier time. LA has become a lot easier. Knock on wood, quick, whatever, throw salt over your shoulder. We hope it continues. But LA has actually not been that bad in the last 6 months. Pretty relatively fast turnaround times. People struggle with appointments, but we'll get that in a moment. But eventually it happens. Nobody's failed to move to Spain because they never got an appointment. So first process is you reach out. If you're going to do it through a professional company like Americans Moving to Spain, like my company, obviously you reach out to them. And then what we do with our clients is we create a customized checklist of what documentation they'll need based on their specific visa type, in this case, let's say NLV, but also their particular circumstances, because again, not all applications are the same. If you're using Social Security as your basis, we need to get your Social Security benefit summary apostilled and translated, for example. If you're just using cash from a bank account, we're just going to go basically with bank statements. So it's a little bit different for everybody, but there are certain elements that are all in common. The first big one I tell people to do is get their FBI background check. Not because an FBI background check is slow. It's actually a very fast process. I recommend a service to my clients that usually turns around results in under 24 hours. Like I've had people driving back from their fingerprinting appointment and get the results in their inbox on their phone, So it's usually very fast. That's not the slow part. The slow part, and this is why I want people jumping on it first, is the apostille. So certain documents must be apostilled, including your FBI background check, and that's a federal apostille. And wait times for federal apostilles can vary a lot based on demand and staffing and what have you. Right now, we're recording this in September 2025. They're running pretty fast by historical standards, believe it or not. With all the chaos going on in Washington, they still seem to be doing apostilles pretty well. Right now, average wait times are about, I would say, 3 to 4 weeks. But historically, we've seen that go as high as, I think the record I've ever heard of was 11 weeks. So, budget accordingly. So getting the apostille for your FBI background check is key. Other documents may need to be apostille depending on the nature of your application. If you're a married couple, we'll need we need to get your marriage certificate apostilled.
Is that apostille? Is that through the United States or is it through Spain?
No, that's through the United States. So let's take a moment and talk about what an apostille is, because this is
like a notary.
Very important. This is a very important. Then a lot of people, for obvious reasons, have no experience with apostilles. It's not something that comes up a lot. Apostilles were this whole process was established by a convention, the Hague Convention, signed in 1961. Currently, as of 2025, I believe there are approximately 92 signatories to the Hague Convention. In other words, countries that recognize the apostille process. What is an apostille? It's simply an internationally recognized, established by this Hague Convention, method for validating and verifying mostly public documents, in some cases private. For Spain in particular, Spain generally only asks for an apostille for public documents like background checks, marriage certificates, birth certificates, things like that, public pension letters. So for the most part, there are exceptions, but it's usually public documents. And it's simply a way for a government organization to say, yes, this is a real FBI background check. We recognize this is a valid document and give you this apostille as a certificate. I always joke, think of it as notarization on steroids.
Notary.
Right. But one that's internationally recognized. And there's an international convention for it. Okay. You, generally speaking, and there are exceptions because God forbid it be completely consistent, right? That would make my job too easy. There are exceptions, but as a general principle, you get documents apostilled at the level at which they are emitted. So, for example, if you and your husband were born in the state of California, where are we going to get that document apostilled? By the state of California. All 50 states are also signatories. They also do apostilles at the state level. So if you're married in California, you get a recent copy of your marriage certificate, and the state of California apostilles it. An FBI background check is a federal document, obviously. It's right there in the name, FBI, federal. And so you can't get a California, but you need to get that federally apostilled, right? Now, state apostilles, as in many other respects, the United States sometimes doesn't feel like one country, but 50, right? And with apostilles, that's also true. The length of time it takes and the complexity of getting state apostilles varies hugely from one state to the next. California is not too bad, actually. It's relatively easy to get apostilles in California. Heavens forbid you got married or had children in Hawaii, because Hawaii is glacially slow. And then other states have other requirements too. Some states, I believe New York State, I want to say, requires that it must first be notarized and then apostilled. I think Florida might as well. I can't remember. We have apostille experts who take care of all that. So some states have a little other extra hoop to jump through, but generally state apostilles are relatively straightforward. And with the exception of some outliers like Hawaii, relatively fast too. There are states, actually. I had a client in Oklahoma recently who was able to just go into the government office and she walked out with the apostille. I mean, it was same day service, but alas, that's not the case in many other states.
So one person might have 3 different apostilles.
Depending on the application,
they might have
even
their
more,
marriage,
even more.
The marriage certificate. They'll have the FBI background check. Mm-hmm. They might have a pensioner's
maybe
apostille.
If you've got a public pension, we generally want that apostilled. So yes, one application could have multiple apostilles. The absolute bare minimum would be if you were applying by yourself, you're not married, you're using bank accounts as opposed to a public pension, the absolute minimum number of apostilles would be 1, and that would be for your FBI background check. Okay.
Yes.
Right. And then you start bringing in families, and you got to get birth certificates for the children apostilled. Then the numbers start moving up from there. Right.
So once you have all of this paperwork together, you bring it with you to the consulate?
Well, so what we do is we work with the client to gather up all of their documentation, and then we have to get an appointment at the consulate. And in our case, our methodology is about 1 to 2 weeks normally before their appointment at the consulate, we do what's called a document review and interview prep session. We spend about 30 minutes to an hour on the phone with the client, on a Zoom call with the client. We go through every single piece of paper they need for their application to make absolutely sure they have it. It's correct. It's been, where necessary, we've already translated it. We've got the necessary apostilles. We do all their applications forms for them. If you're doing it solo, you would have to do those yourself. We go through all of those documents with the client to make sure their application is solid. And we also give them tips on how to prepare for the actual interview itself. It's called an interview, but it's really not. Frankly, most of the time you're going to be there is just going to be waiting. Your actual conversation time with consular or BLS employees is going to be relatively probably 10, 15 minutes of actual FaceTime. A lot of it's just hurry up and wait. So, but we always give people tips though on, dress appropriately, be nice. Don't volunteer information. When you're asked questions, answer only what is asked of you. Don't don't start going off.
Go on
like
and
chat. People get nervous. They get chatty. And I always tell people every tidbit of information, I'm not telling people to be unfriendly or uncooperative. Be both cooperative and friendly, but don't be too chatty. Why? Because of what I just said earlier in this interview, you don't volunteer information to any bureaucracy because it just invites more questions. If they ask you, what is 2 + 2? You say 4. That is all you say. You don't talk about your feelings about 4. You don't go on about how one time you met somebody whose birthday was on no, 4. You say it with a smile, you say it politely, but you say 4 and you shut up. Right. So we prepare clients for that. And most of it's pretty common sense stuff, but there are some tips that we have. And we're also on standby over WhatsApp or text or something while they're at their interview, just to make sure, just in case. Every once in a while, something goes pear-shaped and they get an unexpected request and we have to dive in and send something. That's pretty rare, but it does happen. So we like to be on standby while they're at their appointment. Typically, appointments, I've seen people in and out in 45 minutes, I think is probably the record. Longest I think I've ever remember a client being in was maybe 4 or 5 hours. And again, that's not getting grilled. That's just because they were busy. That's just that was like mostly just waiting around because they were just swamped and backed up and they just had to spend a lot of time there.
So after the interview takes place, then they say, okay, we'll get back to you?
Yes. So they have 90 days to make a decision. Unfortunately, unlike with some other visa types, if they reach 90 days and have not given you a resolution, unlike with some other visa types, that doesn't mean it's automatically approved. It means the opposite. It means that they could have the right to just kind of time it out and then reject it. That has never happened to a client of ours. I only know that from conversations with our attorneys. It's never actually happened to any client of ours. But if you had a poorly done application or issues, I suppose it could. Wait times vary a lot based on time of year. Earlier this year in May, they made a lot of changes to several visa types. One of the biggest impacts was actually caused by a change to the student visa, which doesn't affect almost any of our clients. We have very few student visa applications at our company. But why did it affect our clients? Because here was the change. Spain suddenly said, oh, okay, students, you can't just come here to Spain and enroll at a university and get your student visa here. No. You need to do it through the consulates in your home country. So what impact this have on the consulates? It hugely increased their workload.
Oh, yeah.
So instead of, 100,000 students all coming to Spain, signing up and applying here, they're all applying back. How many? I made up that number. I don't know what the actual number was, but a huge number of students in the state were having to go through the consulate. So the consulates were overwhelmed. This had a big knock-on effect to non-lucrative visa applicants because suddenly their wait times went way, way up. So starting from May onwards, all the way through August, wait times really, really spiked on approvals. I think our record, and it turned out well, they're actually here in Sevilla now. They moved here. They're now friends of mine / ex-clients. They had to wait almost 12 weeks for their approval. They were getting very nervous, as you can imagine. So, but now that student visa wave is over, because now we're in the middle of September as we record this, the school year has started. That load has come off the consulates. And we've had 5 clients go through Chicago consulate in the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks, all have their approvals now, every single one of them.
Wow.
That's like record. I was like, what? Even I was surprised. One of them got it in 8 business days, if you can believe that. Which,
Isn't a requirement also that you need a residence before you even get approved?
Let's talk about that one because so let me start by saying that and this is an important point, not just for this topic, but others. The consulates, in some ways, operate as their own little fiefdoms. They have a lot of latitude to interpret the rules and to make their own local policies, okay? Why am I saying? Because this is very relevant to this very topic of the address. This is a great example. The consulates decide what constitutes sufficient proof of accommodation. Some consulates are super laid back about it. Perfect example. all of those 5 clients I just mentioned that went through Chicago here in the last 2.5 weeks. In every case, they use an Airbnb receipt, a paid receipt showing that they had accommodations for 3 months at an Airbnb. Okay. Other consulates would not accept that, Others want proof more like a lease, for example,
Right.
But the 3 months is the key, though. They want to show that you have a confirmed accommodation for at least 3 months. But again, interpretation varies so widely by cons. For example, last year, a client going through New York, some persnickety person got in there, being there bonded, I guess, and decided, no, this isn't good enough. We want an affidavit of accommodation from this friend you say you're staying with. And they made their friend signed a sworn, notarized affidavit swearing that this person could stay with them for 3 months while looking for an apartment. So it's but that same consulate, though, a monthly, you could go through and submit the exact same documentation. They'd be like, oh, that's fine. Yeah, no worries. So for some consulates, you can just write an address. Honestly, you could probably, I wouldn't advise this, but you could probably just make up an address and they wouldn't even check. They wouldn't even care. 123, Banana Avenue. Who cares? Others, they're going to want hardcore proof that is the address and that you really have access to that address. It really varies a lot by consulate.
Now, how do you go about getting a residence?
I know
if you're in the U.S. and don't they say in order to get a resident or a lease, you need a bank account or an NIE? I don't know how true that is.
It depends on who you work with. Let's talk about real estate. First of all, you have to be let me caution your listeners, and I'm very, very serious right now. Spain's real estate market is doesn't have as much oversight and regulation as the U.S. does. I could hang a shingle outside my window tomorrow declaring that I'm a real estate agent. There's a risk, that would be completely illegal, at least in every American state I've ever dealt with. That's a licensed profession. There's exams, there's credentialing, renewals. It's a pretty serious business to become a real estate person. In Spain, it's not. Just about pretty much anybody can call themselves this. So that's one problem. Another problem is that, and I always speak pretty highly of Spain, but I always also believe in talking about warts and all. When it comes to physical, like violent crime, you are by a factor of more than 10, you're much safer in Spain. But when it comes to real estate fraud, Spain has a lot more of that than the United States does. And you must be very, very cautious. I really tell people they download these apps like Idealista or Fotocasa, which are respectable companies themselves. They're app makers. It's like similar to Zillow, that kind of thing in the US, or apartmentfinder.com or something. Similar type.
They're fake listings.
Yeah, listing.
Some of them.
But so they're not the problem. But you have thousands of people posting fake ads on these things. And they're getting very sophisticated. I was reading an article in our local newspaper here in Sevilla a few months ago that now they're using AI to generate like ideal listings, like this beautiful apartment that's just a gorgeous dream home doesn't exist. It's literally a work of fiction. The images are created by AI. Everything is just completely a fiction. And of course, they target foreigners, and you start writing to them. They seem very nice and respectable. And next thing you know, they're telling you that if you just wire them 1,000 euros or 2,000 euros, it's yours.
For a deposit.
It's a holding. It's a deposit on your dream home. Like, well, that seems very reasonable, doesn't it? You'll never see that money again. You'll never see that. Good luck to you. Yeah. And don't think you're going to get that money back. I mean, you should try, take whatever steps you can through your bank or whatever you can do, I suppose. But the good chance you'll never see that money again. And there's a good chance that the person will never come to justice, I'm afraid to say. So I really recommend people work through reputable companies. That's one of the services we offer. We are not ourselves in the real estate business, but we have relationships with many reputable companies that are. And depending on where you are in Spain, we connect you with one of those companies, and they will vet the ads for you and make sure that it's real. They will even, and this brings us to the point of how do you do it if you're in the States, they will even vet apartments for you, do video tours, make sure it's legit, potentially even allow you to sign a lease before you even get here. Now, people say, well, don't I need a Spanish bank account and an NIE number? It depends on who you ask. Many landlords are not comfortable renting to people unless they have an NIE number, like a Spanish identity number. But many others don't care. It's not a legal requirement per se. You don't need, it would be impossible to make it a legal requirement because no one would come here on vacation, right? I mean, you're talking about a 3-month rentals, right? So it depends on the landlord's kind of attitude about it. But the point is, there are opportunities to sign leases without a Spanish bank account and without a Spanish NIE number. It is possible. It's just a little more challenging. That's all.
Because you can't get an NIE unless you have a visa.
Well,
correct?
you can for certain purposes. So in Spain, to purchase real estate, which is a very different matter than renting, to purchase real estate, now this is the law, and this is not up to the seller. You must have an NIE number. However, you don't need a visa to get an NIE number. The Spanish government will issue you an NIE number for the purpose of purchasing real estate. It's a process. We can do it for clients if they want. It's usually not necessary, but if they want to purchase before they have their visa, we could absolutely request an NIE number be assigned to them by the government for that purpose. That's considered a legitimate basis to request an NIE number, yes.
Okay.
But just to be clear, that doesn't give you any residency rights. It's just a number. That's not a visa.
Right.
That's just a number. That's all that is.
Right. Just a number. Okay.
Right.
To get a
The
bank
trick
account.
is, and this is where people mess up sometimes, the trick is that when you then apply for your non-lucrative visa, it is critical. If you're doing it on your own, make sure you don't mess this up. If we're doing it for you, we would not make this mistake. It is absolutely critical that if you were assigned an NIE number because perhaps you purchased real estate in Spain, or maybe you used to live in Spain for whatever reason, that you put that NIE number on your visa application. Why? Because if you don't, they're going to automatically issue one with the visa. And then you'll have a duplicate. Then you'll have a duplicate NIE numbers. You don't want that. That's a headache. That's just a recipe for a headache. So just make sure you put that NIE number on your application when you submit it, and that way they won't issue you a duplicate.
So that's just about all it takes. I mean, it's enough.
Right. Well,
That's,
I mean,
that's all the steps.
There's some other, that's not the full doc, but those are the highlights. That's the main stuff. That's the stuff that takes more to get. So your FBI background checks, your medical certificate, private insurance, the forms, the proof around your finances, proof of relationship among any co-applicant. So marriage certificate if you're married, birth certificate if you have children, that kind of thing. Get the necessary thing apostilled, and then it's just submitting it and then waiting. Yeah. Now, once you get the visa, though, our journey with you is not over, though, because after you arrive in Spain, there are 3 more steps you have to do. You must get empadronado, which means registering at town hall in the town where you will be living. And then you have to take proof that you live there, like a lease, for example, right? So you have to get empadronado. That's number 1. And we make that appointment for our clients. So that's not a problem. Number 2, you have to go to a national police station and get fingerprinted. And that is in order to get your TIE card. And depends on how busy that particular police station is. I've seen them turn around as little as 2 weeks in some of the larger cities where they have a huge number of foreigners. I've seen up to 2 or 3 months even. But at some point after you get your fingerprints done, they will finally produce your physical TIE card, your foreigner identity card. And then you will go back to that same police station with an appointment to pick it up.
Got it.
Okay. And then you're done. Then that's it. Now the non-lucrative visa, it's important to note that it is what we call a 1+1+2, 1+2+2. I beg your pardon. What is that? It's good for 1 year when you get it. And then you renew it for 2 years, and then you renew it for a final 2 years. When I say final, because that gets you to the 5-year mark. In principle, at the 5-year mark, you want to be applying for permanent residency, right? So you don't want to be once you reach 5 years of residency in Spain, you get that permanent residency, then you don't need a visa anymore. You're in that gray zone between people living here on a visa and citizens. So you're not a citizen yet, but you also don't need a visa because you're considered a permanent resident. And then at the 10-year mark, unless you're lucky enough to have a second passport that's from Latin America, in which case it's much faster. But if you're an American citizen without that second passport that's from Latin America, you're looking at 10 years total to be able to apply for citizenship. 5 to get to permanent residency, then 5 more beyond permanent residency to apply for the citizenship. There's a language test, but it's quite minimal. You don't have to be fluent in Spanish. And there's a civics, just like in the United States, right? You have to take a civics exam to be able to be a citizen, same in Spain. But it's not, this is not
language,
graduate level Spanish history. It's pretty basic.
Right.
So,
and you need language skills.
Well, as I said, there is a language exam, yes, but it is not, you don't have to be fluent. It's a relatively low, it would be like roughly equivalent of like
level 2.
A B1 level of Spanish, somewhere around there. So if you live there for 10 years and you can't get to B1, then I don't think you're trying, right? So,
yeah,
it's pretty easy. It's not
okay.
It's not a good, but so okay, wonderful.
So let's talk let's talk a little bit about taxes, Spanish
Sure.
taxes, how that
Mhm.
works with U.S. taxes, when to file, and it seems very confusing. And I try to put together, something from me. Well, let's say I'm living in the U.S. and I'm living here, and I'm comparing it to living somewhere in Spain. And I tried between taxes and cost of living, and it's not an easy task to do.
Right. Let me say a
So,
couple of things about taxes. Now, let me be clear, I'm not a CPA. I'm not qualified to get into the weeds on. We have CPAs here at Americans Moving to Spain. So if you need to speak to one, we can arrange it. But having sat on enough of those sessions, I can offer a little bit of advice. Number one, the NLV does require after your first year that you be a tax resident. So you will have to file in Spain once you're in that year where you're here at least 183 days, and you must remain a tax resident as long as you're on the NLV. So 183 days or more. Taxes are generally higher than in the U.S. No big surprise, but you get what you pay for, right? For foreigners, that there are really two big deadlines for filing taxes each year. The 31st of March, you must file your declaration on foreign assets over 50,000 euros. That's your 720. That must be filed by 31st of March. But the equivalent of the U.S. April 15th, like everybody's tax filing deadline for normal taxes, income taxes, not just global assets, is June 30th. So by the end of June, you must file your taxes. So what the typical American expat or immigrant client of ours does is they get an extension on their U.S. taxes in April till October, file their Spanish taxes, because remember, Spain is your country of residence, so they get first dibs. Once they know their Spanish tax liability, they give that to their U.S. accountant so that he or she can calculate the credits for foreign taxes paid. And because Spain and the United States have a dual taxation treaty to prevent double taxation, the average client of ours ends up paying really nothing to the U.S. because they've got enough credits from what they paid and enough exemptions from what they paid in Spain and their income here. But you do have to file U.S. taxes regardless, even if you're not living there, even if you never live there for the rest of your life.
Yeah, one of the only countries.
One of the only countries on Earth. There's only like 2 or 3 in the entire planet. Really, the U.S. being the only major country that taxes its citizens or requires them to file based on their citizenship as opposed to their residence. If you're from Madrid and you moved to California and you've lived there and you've been outside of Spain 183 days that year, the Spanish tax authorities stopped. They don't care about you anymore. You're dead to them. I wish, Americans wish that they could be dead to the IRS, but alas, Uncle Sam has a long reach. So get those U.S. taxes filed. So, right.
Okay. So that makes sense. You file your Spanish taxes. Now that's reported. You report on worldwide income.
Yes. So that's what that 721, the one you must file by March, is you're reporting on global assets. Now, what you actually declare, I mean, you have to work with your accountant on that. There's certain minimum asset values. Under a certain minimum, you don't have to declare. There's more to it. But generally, that's it.
One thing that's a little confusing to, I know a lot of people. So let's say you have a retirement account with your basic, your basis of your funds in the retirement account. Do you count that as worldwide assets, or do you report only what you take out of a retirement account as?
Well, that's something I wouldn't feel, because Spain doesn't recognize the tax exemption of everything the U.S. does in terms of like IRAs, 401k. Some they do, some they don't. We're getting too far into the weeds. We would want our accountants to look. That's why we have accountants. We schedule sessions with our clients. They go through everything and they advise them this is considered tax exempt. This is not. This they're looking at total assets. This is protected. It gets pretty far into the weeds. It's definitely not as simple as, well, it's exempt in the U.S., so it is in Spain. It isn't that simple, for sure.
Okay. And in Spain, different autonomous communities have different rules regarding.
So there's national taxes, but then the comunidades themselves have their own taxation. Some comunidades have wealth taxes, others don't. Here in Andalusia, we don't have a wealth tax. Valencia, for example, where Valencia is, they do. So that varies by, but the wealth tax doesn't kick in until you have a fair bit of money. So I don't.
Like 3 million.
Yeah. So I'm not, my sympathy level isn't so.
Right.
Like if that's going to be a problem for you, I'm not crying a lot of tears for you.
Yeah. My heart's not bleeding.
Right. So.
Yeah, I got you. And also, besides wealth taxes, inheritance tax.
Yes,
in
their
some.
inheritance taxes, and that's something that when people come over, we advise them to talk to planners and lawyers specializing in estates to make sure that is addressed appropriately, for sure. For sure.
Now, what's the difference between hiring you and hiring an attorney?
Well, so here's the funny thing. Most of our competitors are actually law firms dressed up as relocation companies because they figure, well, the hard part is getting the visa and we need the lawyers for that, as we do. Of course, we use lawyers. We have to. Lawyers have to be involved. Where they fall down and why they have such a high rate of dissatisfied customers is because they don't realize when they get into this game, they think, oh, this will be easy money. We can charge foreigners double what we charge Spaniards for our legal fees. The problem is that what they don't appreciate is that only about 30 to 40% of the lift is the legal part, right? You need a lot more knowledge that goes way beyond those laws. And this is why I would encourage people, if you're going to do a consult with some law firm that says, oh yeah, we'll move you to Spain, come up with a list of questions. I've even posted on our Facebook group a list of like 9 or 10 questions I recommend you ask them that have nothing to do with visas. Ask them about schools. How do you use the education system? Would you recommend movers? What about helping me stay safe from real estate scams? Can you refer me to companies that will get me settled? How do you, deal? What about taxes? Are going to be able to do this? Ask them a lot of questions about relocation that aren't just about the legal part of it, and watch them get uncomfortable and start sweating and, well, let me get back to you on that. Or just flat out say, well, we don't do that. That's not what we do. So they call themselves relocation companies, but really they're just law firms who are going to help you fill out the forms and submit it.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's not important. Of course, that's critical. You have to get that part right, but it's only a small piece of the puzzle.
Okay. How do you get your pets over there?
Pets. Now that's a whole other thing. Cats are easy. Unless you have an exceptionally large cat. What do they call those? Maine Coons, those giant cats. Chances are if it fits in a carrier, like tigers, and you can take the cat with you on board under the seat in a cat carrier, and you're good. That's even possible with some small dogs. Larger dogs become more of a problem, and that's where the expense starts to go up. So
I have a medium-sized dog.
Yeah,
that's
so
35
that
pounds.
Can get a little bit more expensive. Some people even get together and they all charter a private jet together, to avoid some airlines. The problem is airlines can be their policies are constantly shifting. There are some times a year they will do it. There's sometimes they won't. And a lot of people are just very anxious about the idea of putting in their dogs in the cargo hold. That's a lot of people are just very, we've all heard the terrible stories, on the news about bad endings for that, which is why a lot of the airlines are refusing to, they won't fly animals if the exterior temperature at the point of departure and the point of arrival is below or above a certain temperature. So, and that can make it very difficult to challenge. If you get a heat wave and you're one of these airlines where if it's below 40 Fahrenheit or above 85, we won't let you go that day. And you're like, oh, it's November, it's mild, it'll be fine. Suddenly a heat wave hits at your destination and it's 90 degrees that day, or there's a cold snap where you're departing from and it's suddenly, 35 degrees Fahrenheit when you're supposed to take off. They won't let the dog fly. They'll revoke it and then you're just stuck. Right. So what do you do? So.
Because our whole summer in Phoenix is over 110 degrees. So
I know, consistently. So forget about that. I think, this private charters are great, but of course they can be very expensive. Although there are some companies that are bringing that price down quite a bit.
So they also require something from the FDA, like a certificate.
It's actually the U.S. It's actually from the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
USDA,
and it is a health certificate. Really, it's mostly about rabies. Of course, that's the big concern, right? But yes, it has to be acquired within 10 days of travel, which can be a bit tricky. And you do need the hard copy. But any veterinarian who works, the USDA certifies certain veterinarians to be licensed to get these letters and request these. I just tell people, call your veterinarian. If they look at you blankly when you ask them for this letter for international travel, it means they're probably not qualified to do it. Ask them for a referral or call another veterinarian, but it won't be, especially if you're in a larger city, it won't take many phone calls before you find one who's qualified to do that for sure.
And then my doggy will get a doggy passport and I'll still have a U.S. passport and he'll have an EU passport. All right, Christopher, let's talk about on-arrival logistics. When you get there, there's so many things to do and set up, like TIE appointments, fingerprints. NIE numbers. What do you do first?
Right. And this is a great topic because this is true pretty much regardless of what visa type you have. There are some things you have to go through. The three big ones are, and this is common again to all visa types, empadronamiento, I'll come back to that in a second, huellas, aka fingerprints, and picking up your TIE card. So what is empadronamiento is simply registering at your local town hall as a resident of their jurisdiction. And foreigners should not feel singled out. Actually, all Spaniards must do this too. So not as often as foreigners do. Until you're a permanent resident, you're required to renew your padrón. It's called every 2 years. But this is a typical function that all Spaniards must do when they move. Basically, you're letting the local town hall know that you're in their jurisdiction, and that helps with census, that helps with allocation of resources, things like that. And in most places, you also need proof that you have that empadronamiento done in order to go to the next step, which is going to the national police station nearest you, or the nearest one with availability anyway, to get fingerprinted. And that's a very straightforward process. There's a form you have to fill out. There's a payment form, the ubiquitous 790 that's used for government fees of many kinds. You take that to the bank, you pay I don't remember the exact amount. I think it's currently around roughly 16 euros or so. So, very little money. They stamp it at the bank. You take that with you. You take the padrón you got from the town hall, and you go to your appointment to get fingerprinted for your TIE card. So that's the second one. Third one, of course, is just going to pick up the TIE card. That's I would say that's very easy. You just take your ID, you take the confirmation number. You do need an appointment in most places. You pick up your card and you're done. So those are the three big ones. And that's going to be true whether you're here on a non-lucrative visa, which most of your listeners would be. But even if you're here on a digital nomad visa or some other visa, you still have to go through those steps regardless.
Do you need an NIE number?
So the NIE number, that's a great question because this causes a lot of confusion. A lot of people are like, oh, I should get my NIE number before I start applying for my visa. It'll make things go faster. No, it won't. The only people who need to get an NIE number before getting their visa typically are people who are trying to buy real estate, because you do need an NIE number to purchase real estate in Spain, even if you never get a visa. Even if you don't intend to use that as part of your visa, you still must have an NIE to purchase real estate in Spain. But if you're not purchasing real estate in Spain, there's really no value in getting an NIE number before applying for your non-lucrative visa, because you're assigned an NIE number it's actually in your approval. It's actually there on the little sticker they put in your passport is your assigned NIE number. Very important last point about NIE numbers. If you did previously get an NIE number because you maybe purchased real estate in Spain before you decided to move there, maybe you purchased it as a second home, make sure to put that existing NIE number on your application for the NLV. Why? If you don't, Spain will issue you a duplicate. Then you'll have two NIE numbers, and you just need to take my word for it when I say you don't want that. Imagine an analogous scenario in the United States where you got assigned two social security numbers. Can you imagine how much of a bureaucratic nightmare that would be for you?
Chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So make sure if you've already gotten an NIE number for whatever reason, maybe you used to live in Spain, maybe you bought real estate, put it on that application form to make sure you don't get a duplicate.
Great. So do people come to you and actually ask you, what region or where should I move to? Did they ever, or do they know?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, sure. All the time. That's actually a pretty common. Many times when we're doing an initial consultation, it varies. There's a whole range of people. Some people are they already know exactly where they're going to move. They know exactly what kind of visa they're going to get. They've already really decisive on that. But many people come to us very early in the decision-making process. They don't even know where in Spain they want to live. They're not even certain of which is the right visa type. And we're very adept at helping people kind of walk through that. I mean, at the end of the day, choosing where you want to live is a very personal decision, but we help by asking them some questions to understand. For example, if you hate rainy weather, you know what? Galicia is not for you, right? If you can't stand too much heat and humidity, then, obviously, maybe, the Southeast is not going to be a great match for you. So it depends on what your preferences are. It goes beyond weather, of course. It's other factors as well. Culture, what kind of lifestyle you're looking for. Do you want to be around expats or do you want to be in a more authentic Spanish area? So there are a lot of, language comes into it. If you don't speak a word of Spanish, maybe moving to the interior of Extremadura might be a bit of a challenge, right? So it all depends on what your needs and wants are, for sure.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about driving. So how do you go get your license? And I would imagine you don't want to bring your car. to Spain.
Mhm.
Um, let's talk just
let's break
briefly
that out
about
into two
about
questions.
how.
Yeah, let's break that into two.
Got it.
First of all, let me briefly just say I strongly recommend against importing a car into Spain. Whenever clients ask me, my best and first advice is don't do it. Okay, that's the absolute best advice I can give. Don't do it. It's expensive. And also remember, Spain has its own, of course, as any country would, its own regulations in terms of where, what color the blinkers have to be, where, how far above the ground must the brake light be, all these little particular things that your car will have to adhere to if you import it. Now, some cars can be modified to adhere to local requirements, but in some cases they can't be. And I have heard multiple horror stories that people who imported a car only to find that basically they're stuck with just a piling bolt of, a bucket of bolts because they can't register it in Spain. So, but if you're going to not heed that advice, if you're going to insist on importing your car, make sure to use a reputable company that can evaluate your make and model, make sure that it's either already compliant or is able to become compliant upon arrival in Spain. So, and that it can be registered, because otherwise what you've done is you've imported a very expensive piece of steel that will serve no purpose. So that's one thing. Now, as far as the driver's license go, let me give you the bad news first. The bad news is that while Spain recognizes the driver's licenses of many countries, that list does not include the United States. And frankly, anybody who knows how easy it is to get a license in the United States can probably sympathize with why Spain doesn't recognize American licenses. So Spain does require you with it. If you're going to drive, nobody's requiring you to drive. So if you don't want to drive, forget it. But if you do want to drive, the rule is this: once you've moved to Spain, you have 6 months to get a Spanish driver's license. And to do so, you must pass both the theory test and the practice test. Now, I've given you the bad news. Here's the good news. They offer the theory test in English. Isn't that nice? Now, it's British English, but whatever. So a truck's going to be a lorry, okay? But, whatever. And they do even publish an official version of the guide in English. The English is not going to win any awards for best translation, okay? There's some interesting little quirks in there, but it's English, and you can take the test in English. The practicum, the actual driving part where they judge your ability to actually drive a car, you're probably going to be with a Spanish-speaking person from the DG who doesn't necessarily speak English, but that's okay. They point left, you turn left. They wave towards the parking spot, you park. It's not rocket science, right? But it's nice to know that at least you can take the test in English.
What happens, Christopher? What happens after that 6-month period? You can't get a license anymore?
Oh no, you can get a license at any time. You could live here for 10 years and then decide to get a license. Spain isn't saying you're required to get that license in 6 months. Only if you're going to be driving, right? If you choose not to drive, if you choose not to have a car, and then you're living in Spain for 5 years, and suddenly you think, you know what? Or maybe you move to a place where you need one. Let's say you live the first 5 years of your life in Spain in Madrid, and who needs a car? Who wants to even have the headache of a car in Madrid, right? But then after 5 years, you decide to move to rural Extremadura or something. I don't know. You can't live without a car. You could go and get your driver's license. It's no problem. The problem you'll have is if you're outside of those 6 months and you're driving along and you get pulled over by the police and they look at your date of entry into Spain, they look at your driver's license, then you're in trouble. Okay. Then you face a fine of up to, I think don't quote me on this, but I believe it's around 500 euros. So right there, that's, 500 euros out of the pocket. I don't know how many points. I don't know how many penalties. So if you're going to own a car, don't mess around with it. Last thing I'm going to say on this topic is be careful about insurance companies because they don't care. Okay. So let's say you move to Spain. You're here in your first month and you really want to buy a car. Let's say you have to buy a car because of where you're living. Now you're not at the 6 month deadline yet. So an insurance company in Spain, they'll happily take your money. They'll insure your car. They'll say, oh, that's fine. You're not outside the 6 months yet. It's not their job, nor are they going to take the responsibility for reminding you to get that Spanish license after 6 months, right? That's a you problem, not a them problem. They'll continue taking your money for years. But let's say year 2, you're in an accident, heavens forbid. Now, what do you think that Spanish insurance company is going to say when you try to file a claim? Where's your Spanish driver's license? Well, you didn't tell me, not our job to tell you had to do that. We took your American license because you were still within 6 months. You never got in touch with us to tell you you had gotten a Spanish license, which is by law what you were supposed to do. Now, do you think,
Right.
knowing what you know about insurance companies, do you think they're going to pay that claim? So
No way.
they're always, and this is
No way.
something true of all insurance companies, have one thing in common, no matter what corner of the world you're in. They don't want to pay.
Yeah.
And if they can find a reason not to pay, they will find a reason not to pay. So my advice is don't mess around with it. If you're going to own a car, suck it up, go to a track. Many places, especially places with a lot of expats, they'll even have classes in English too, if you want. So my advice is if you're going to own a car, suck it up and do it.
Got it. Got it. Okay. In closing, what's the single biggest mistake you want Americans to avoid when moving to Spain in 2025?
The biggest single thing I would say is make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And I'm glad you said in 2025, because we're living in a very particular moment in history, to put it mildly, right?
Yes.
And I help many Americans move to Spain, and many of them, let's be honest, let's put our cards on the table. Many of them are leaving in no small part because of the current political climate, especially members of the LGBTQ plus community, because they feel quite justifiably that there's a target on their back. What I would caution you is to say that make sure you know what you're running to, not just what you're getting away from. Okay. All the empathy in the world that you want to get out under the circumstances. I certainly wouldn't want to be living in the United States right now, but just be clear that you're running to something as well. Otherwise, I think there's a very high risk that you're going to be unhappy, once you get here. So understand what your why is, and make sure it's something positive, not just fleeing a negative, is what my advice would be.
I think that's great advice. Do you find that there are some people, and I guess there are a percentage of people that go over to Spain that wind up coming back after a few years?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because they didn't have that why.
Well, I think that's a lot of it. Yeah. There was this article going around recently written by a guy who, and I don't know who this person is. I don't know this person, but claims to have a relocation company and been responsible for moving many, many hundreds of Americans here over the last decade. And in this article, he claimed that 75% of Americans move home.
I read that.
I
couldn't believe that, though.
So first of all, let me say, to me, that was a signed confession that he was bad at his job, in my opinion. Okay. So if you vetted the people moving to Spain, so I vet my clients as much as they vet me, and I want to make sure I'm working with the right people, So I question, I do not believe that subset that he was studying of his client base is representative of Americans moving to Spain overall. I question what his role was as their relocation consultant in moving people there who clearly, in many cases probably had no business moving, would be the second thing. I do not believe that's representative of the overall immigrant and expatriate community here in Spain. There's 60,000 Americans living in Spain. I feel quite certain that if you do the math, I feel quite certain that 45,000 of them won't be moving back over the next few years.
Right.
So yeah, I think, plus the other problem with that article is it doesn't take into account people who move back, because that was always the plan. Many people move abroad as a fixed term. Those are the people I associate more with the term expat, right? That's like, we're going to go abroad. We want that live in Europe experience for a while. Maybe we want our kids to learn Spanish, but the plan from day one was always to move back eventually. Same with expat workers. They get a job opportunity in Barcelona. Who doesn't want to live in Barcelona for a couple of years? But then they always have the intention at some point of going back. So many problems with that article that I see there. What are the actual figures? What are the real figures? The fact is we don't know, because this is not something that's really tabulated by, either the Spanish or the American governments really closely. But I will say this, of the customers we've helped move to Spain in the last few years, I know very few who've moved back. Who knows what the future will hold. But I think those who do, let's take though the subset, this is what we're really trying to drill down on here. Let's take the subset who did move with the intention of staying forever and who end up moving back. I think probably those people didn't know what they were getting into. I think they didn't really have an understanding of Spanish culture. I would suspect that they probably make little to no effort to integrate and to learn the language. And to go back to what I said before, they didn't have a clear understanding of what their why was before they made the move. Yeah. Look, I know it sounds cliche, but cliches are true for a reason oftentimes, right? And the fact is, when you move to another country, there you still are. And I think this is another problem that people are trying to get away from themselves. And whoever you are in Wichita, Kansas, or Manhattan or LA is going to be who you are in Barcelona or Murcia or Madrid. Okay. You are not going to fundamentally change as a person. Your life will change. You will change and evolve and grow as a person as you live abroad. But the core person that you are at your center is going to be you in, whether it's in Tarragona or in Timbuktu. Right.
Right. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. That's been great. Where could our audience find you, Christopher?
Sure,
on your website, your Facebook group? Tell us.
Yeah, well, so it's funny
information.
because we rebranded the company in no small part because of the Facebook group, because so many people associate us with that Facebook group that we finally had to bow to the inevitable. So now they're both the same. So AmericansMovingToSpain.com, and that's the name of our Facebook group, Americans Moving to Spain. And there's also a sister group, LGBTQ plus Americans Moving to Spain. That is a private Facebook group. However, you have to ask permission to join that, and that's by design. That was actually part of a request that from earlier this year. We had so many people from that community, again, after the inauguration, feeling targeted, but also wanting anonymity because they did feel so targeted. So we created that one as a private group, but you're welcome to join it. The only thing we ask is you please agree to the rules, because there's a lot of rules around, like no harassment, we don't want trolls coming into that group. So, but the Americans Moving to Spain Facebook group is completely open. So feel free to join that one as well. Okay.
Got it.
Great.
And how about your email address? Could somebody contact you?
That's easy. info@americansmovingtospain.com.
Perfect. Well, Christopher, thank you so much. You've been a wealth of information. Everything's been great. And we look forward to speaking to you again. And maybe someday we'll meet up in Sevilla.
When you're in Spain, look me up. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and consider making a donation by clicking the coffee cup on any page at www.wheredogaysretire.com. Each cup of coffee that you buy costs $5 and goes towards helping us continue the podcast. Thank you for your continued support.